and Rachel Breeze. You're listening to the Marketplace Morning Report from APM, American Public Media.
On the next Electro Lounge, we've got music by Thievery Corporation, Billie Eilish, and Curtis Harding. The chill begins Saturday at 9 at the Electro Lounge, only on WJCT News 89.9.
The North Florida TPO is committed to shaping our transportation future. We're focused on planning, funding, clean fuels, and new technologies for a vibrant, connected community. Learn more at northfloridatpo.com. Baptist Health is a proud supporter of First Coast Connect. Baptist Health, committed to building a healthier community for all of us. More info at 202-4YOU or baptistjacks.com.
This is WJCT News 89.9 Jacksonville. Up next, national and local news from NPR and the WJCT News team.
Good morning, I'm Ann Schindler, and on today's First Coast Connect, it's the biggest stories of the week. The mayor vetoes a controversial immigration measure, and a fractured council backs her decision. Camp Landing is eyed as an ICE detention facility. A St. Johns County sludge spreader is sued for stinking up the neighborhood, and a local landlord is fined for penalizing service members given relocation orders. We discuss all that with our panel of journalists and you on our Friday Week in Review. Later, a world of pure imagination will tell you how you can get your hands on the golden ticket to a new production of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Join the conversation. Give us a call at 904-549-2937 or email firstcoastconnect@wjct.org. It's all ahead this hour after the day's news.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Windsor Johnston. The Supreme Court is wrapping up its current term today. NPR's Nina Totenberg reports the justices are expected to issue a number of decisions, including one on birthright citizenship.
The birthright citizenship case is the headliner today, but it's something of a bait and switch. Despite the Constitution's provision guaranteeing citizenship to anyone born in the U.S., President Trump issued an executive order allowing citizenship only for certain individuals. The order was promptly struck down by 3 separate federal judges, Republican and Democratic appointees alike. The Justice Department appealed to the Supreme Court, but perhaps sensing an almost certain loss on the main question, it has asked the court to stop judges from issuing decisions that apply nationwide, like this one. If the administration prevails, it will make litigating many of Trump's executive orders far more difficult. Nina Totenberg, NPR News, Washington.
Even if everyone in the country who was eligible to vote did so in the 2024 election, President Trump still would have won. NPR's Domenico Montanaro has more on a study conducted by the Pew Research Center after the election.
Historically, higher turnout was thought to be better for Democrats because younger voters and non-white voters lean left, and they traditionally vote at lower rates. But of the thousands of people that Pew interviewed who didn't vote in the 2024 presidential election, 44% said they preferred Trump, while 40% said they would have rather seen Democrat Kamala Harris in the White House. So even if everyone who could have voted did, Trump's overall very narrow popular vote win would have expanded from 1.5 percentage points to 3. That's a reversal from the last 2 presidential elections when non-voters said they preferred the Democratic candidates. The finding was part of an almost 9,000-person Pew survey conducted in the weeks after the presidential election. Domenico Montanaro, NPR News, Washington.
Despite a slight increase in oil today, the apparent end to Israel's war with Iran has seen a significant drop in global oil prices over the past week. Villa Marks reports.
The risks of a major new Middle East conflict and its consequences for oil supplies in the Persian Gulf have almost evaporated after the short, sharp exchange of rockets and airstrikes ended in a ceasefire several days ago. The price for oil has fallen significantly in line with the reduced threat to supply, from around $80 a barrel in the middle of June after Israel first began targeting Iranian nuclear facilities to around $67 after President Trump announced that ceasefire. The latest weekly price drop of around 12% is the largest fall in more than 2 years, as crude oil from Iran and other major producers in the Gulf region have continued to flow unimpeded. Concerns about an Iranian blockade of a major shipping route, the Straits of Hormuz, have proven to be unfounded. For NPR News, I'm Willem Marks.
This is NPR News in Washington.
You're listening to WJCT News 89.9 in Jacksonville. Good morning. I'm Stephen Ponson. It is now 9:04. Construction started on two parts of a planned regional park in central St. Johns County. A county groundbreaking ceremony kicked off the Silverleaf Sportsplex and the Shearwater Community Park and Library next to Trout Creek Academy off of County Road 16A. The Sportsplex will have 5 fields with synthetic turf, 3 more with grass and space for tailgating and food trucks. Shearwater Park will have space for recreational programs, pickleball and basketball courts, and more. The library will have a recreation center and a walk-up book drop. The facilities should open by early 2027. Citizens Property Insurance's policies are dropping and are projected to be fewer than 654,000 by the end of the year. At last check, policies were below 800,000 last week, which is down from more than 1.3 million policies at the end of May 2023. Citizens was created as an insurer of last resort, but became the state's largest insurer in recent years amid problems in the private market. Citizens President Tim Serio says Florida's private insurance market is getting healthy.
The recovery is there, and you're seeing more and more competition come into the market, which is good for Floridians. It's good for citizens, and it promotes a smaller citizens and for us to really return to that role of the insurer of last resort.
State leaders have tried to keep citizens' policies low, in part because of financial risks the state would have if it's hit by a major hurricane or multiple hurricanes. Rain chances increase this afternoon for northeast Florida, highs in the 90s inland, upper 80s along the coast.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include Melville Charitable Trust, committed to ensuring all people have a safe, stable, and affordable home that allows them to thrive. Information about ways to prevent and solve homelessness is at melvilletrust.org.
Good morning. I'm Ann Schindler, and this is First Coast Connect. It's Friday, which means it's time for our First Coast Week in Review. Among our topics, the Jacksonville City Council aligns with the mayor's rejection of a controversial immigration bill. A former Westside military base could become a federal detention center. Big public records request ends costing a local man big money after the agency sued him and won. A St. Johns County sewage sludge factory is sued for noxious odors. And a mega-landlord pays a hefty penalty after charging service members early termination fees. To talk about all that and more, I am joined for the first time on my watch by Robin Lum, former at-large Jacksonville City Council member. Good morning, Robin.
Good morning. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you so much for being here. We're also joined by Mike Mendenhall, City Hall reporter and associate editor at Jacksonville Today. Good morning, Mike.
Good morning, Ann. Good to be here.
Good to have you. Also joined by Dan Scanlan, reporter here at WJCT News 89.9. Good morning, Dan.
Hey, good morning.
All right, a lot to get to this week, but let's start with a vote on this controversial immigration bill. The mayor chose to veto it, calling it, quote, political theater disguised as fiscal oversight. Mike, why did the mayor say that she decided to veto this bill? And remind us what it called for.
Yeah, so this bill was introduced by Councilmember Rory Diamond. Essentially, what it would have done was it would have allowed, or would have actually required the city to ask all nonprofit organizations, all organizations that were getting city funding for services, to prove and show documentation that that money was not going to undocumented immigrants. Mayor Deegan, she vetoed the bill. She said it didn't align with the city's values. She also said that it would have had very unforeseen costs, and the ability to actually execute it would have been difficult because there's no apparatus, no infrastructure currently to do that. And she also said that that there was some duplication. She pointed out in the press conference that every contract that the city has already has a clause in there that says that we're not that you're supposed to, that if any company that works with the city should already know what the status is. It's following federal law. So she said that the city of Jacksonville, and she also retorted some of the pushback, saying that that her veto would have amounted to Jacksonville becoming a sanctuary city. She said, look, Jacksonville is not a sanctuary city. It will never be a sanctuary city because we follow state and federal law.
So she said that there was a number of things she thought this could put in jeopardy, including public safety,
Yes.
public health, and the city's economy. But she spoke before the council vote, listing some of those reasons. Let's take a listen to what she had to say.
Second, this ordinance compromises Jacksonville residents are foreign born. Most of them are naturalized citizens. This bill, in the guise of targeting undocumented immigrants, stokes fear and casts a shadow of suspicion over all immigrants. It chills access to critical social services by subjecting anyone perceived as an immigrant to be screened by local agencies untrained to verify their status, a definition that now seemingly changes by the day. Let me be as clear as I can about this. When families fear calling the police or the fire department, we are less safe. When people delay medical care out of fear, costs rise for everybody. When shadows are created, that is where danger and disease thrive. This bill does not save money. It multiplies harm.
And Robin, at the top of that bite, we missed a little bit of it, but she was saying that there's nearly 120,000 Jacksonville residents that are foreign born, most naturalized citizens, but her concern is that this would create confusion and a heavy burden on these nonprofits trying to vet people to see whether or not they're, whether they have their papers in order.
As my understanding is that legislation was loaded with all kinds of exclusions. For example, services through Kids Hope Alliance, that was excluded. Treatment at Shands Hospital, which receives a substantial amount of money from the city of Jacksonville each year. There were a number of exclusions. So at the end of the day, I don't see what this bill would have accomplished. The notion that failing to pass this turns Jacksonville into a sanctuary city. I think that's false. I think this is what I call flavor of the month republicanism, where it's a popular topic nationally, and clearly the federal government has the authority here, and so they're trying to they're trying to do something locally that makes it look like they're do something. So in politics, it's not what you do; it's appearing to be doing something, and I just don't see this thing as producing a bottom line result.
What is your thought, though, as a former city council member about, is it significant that the mayor sort of won this round? I mean, does it tell us anything about the larger debate over immigration?
I don't think so. The notion, like I said, the notion that suddenly this opens the door for Jacksonville being a sanctuary city, that's just not true. That's hyperbole.
Mm-hmm.
I think it reflects a certain lack of seriousness, and it certainly hurts the credibility of people that try to make claims that aren't supported by the evidence.
Dan, so the mayor is heading into a little bit of a tough season right now. Part of what she did at the end of that press conference was note this very good working relationship she's had with the current president, Randy White. And she said, we've not agreed on a lot of things, but we've never had a cross word. And, said that she hoped that there would be more of that, but he's being replaced by a different kind of leadership that has been much more willing to engage with the mayor and also kind of take positions on national politics. Kevin Carrico, who's been vocal on this immigration debate on the local level.
Yeah, I saw that as a pleasant way to throw the gauntlet down and basically dare the incoming leadership in council to at least negotiate, to converse. To be willing to avoid a veto situation or letting a bill pass as she did with the other immigration bill without her signature back in April. So we shall see what happens. I mean, Carrico has a definitely different style than Randy White did. Randy, former fire chief, leader of people, was very conversational, very, very down home. Kevin is much more direct in the way he addresses things. I've watched him in the land use and zoning committee that he had chaired. It's going to be a different kind of leadership and maybe a little more direct and short. And I do expect that there'll be some challenges during public debate, public hearings, and the open mic session to make sure that everybody sticks to their guns when you have your 3-minute or 2-minute limit. It will be a tightly run ship during city council.
Mike, I'm curious about your thoughts about that, too. I saw the mayor last night congratulating the new leadership on Twitter, saying to Kevin Carrico and the new vice president, Nick Howland, congratulations. But it is going to be probably a tense relationship. So how do you think this veto figures into that? The veto, and then also the council's decision not to override.
Yeah, I mean, well, Kevin Carrico was a co-sponsor on the bill that was vetoed, so I mean that in itself, could I mean, and Kevin Carrico also had an immigration bill earlier in that Dan was referencing
That she chose not to
that she
veto.
chose not to veto, but she also didn't sign it either. So there was, she just let it go into effect. So I mean, there's already been some strain between the two of them, but I think that the mayor is trying to be as strategic as possible here by coming out and extending olive branches publicly, while at the same time acknowledging the fact that that there's going to be, there could be rough seas ahead. But I mean, the first real test is going to be the budget, though. Mayor Deegan's going to be introducing or going to be submitting her budget to City Council in the middle of next month. Last night, Raul Arias, who's also a kind of an up and coming city council member, was named the finance committee chair. He's aligned himself with some of Carrico's positions in the past. So he'll have a lot of sway.
Well, let's talk about Arias a little bit, because this vote passed 8-7. They would have needed 10 votes to override, given the makeup of that that quorum or the presence that they had. So that was 8-7 with zero abstention, zero abstaining. But I'm curious because Raul Arias was there. He originally voted in favor of this immigration bill. He didn't vote at all. So what do we know about why he didn't vote?
Yeah, so I actually talked to Councilmember Arias yesterday, just specifically on this question, and he was at the meeting that night, but he was he told me he was hopping on and off the dais to do some responsibilities for his position as representing the city on the floor, or representing Duval County in the Florida League of Counties. There was a meeting yesterday, and so he was hopping on and off, is what he said, and he did not know when this was when this bill was going to come up for a vote. That's what that was his explanation to me. And that's why he wasn't there for the actual vote.
And we should say, I mean, the kind of reason that is a question is because he's, comes from a family of immigrants. He's been called out, particularly by the Immigrants' Rights Coalition here in Jacksonville, accusing him of betraying his own community by originally supporting this. And so this was an opportunity to weigh in a second time.
It was, and it's interesting. I mean, so like you said, his family immigrated from Panama. He did vote for the bill the first time, but as Robin was actually talking about earlier, Raul Arias was the person responsible for exempting KHA. The
Kids Hope Alliance.
The Kids Hope Alliance. He introduced that amendment when the bill was being passed himself, and what he said during the debate and what he told me yesterday was his biggest concern was that he didn't want to see children adversely affected or hurt by this legislation. But he also told me too. I asked him, had he been there, how would he have voted? And he still said he was 50-50 on the bill. He was very much on the fence. He had a lot of concerns about it. I mean, and I think he told me that he saw things through the lens of an immigrant because of his family
Interesting.
history.
So he was there. He didn't vote, but he said he still hadn't decided.
Yeah, he still hadn't decided. So, but like I said, he was off the dais when the vote actually happened.
And 3 other council members had excused absences.
Yeah, one of whom voted against it, 2 who voted for it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and we should say that Raul Arias' vote wouldn't have changed things one way or the other,
No.
given the makeup that was there that night. We have a call from Curtis on the north side. Good morning, Curtis. Go ahead.
Good morning, my beautiful sister, and to your guests. Man, I love my mayor. I'm so proud of her. I love her for having the courage and the heart to do and be compassionate for people. Oh, my God, I love it. That's all I got to say.
All right.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Curtis. Appreciate the call. If you're just joining us, I'm talking to Mike Mendenhall, Dan Scanlan, and Robin Lum about the week's headlines. You can join our conversation by calling 904-549-2937. You can email firstcoastconnect@wjct.org. You can also watch our live stream on Facebook or the WJCT YouTube page, and you can tag us at FCC On Air at Facebook, Instagram, or on X. I want to move on now to a proposal to build a detention facility for undocumented immigrants on the city's west side. This would be Camp Blanding, Dan Scanlan, a facility that currently is used to train the Florida National Guard.
Yeah, Camp Landing is way, way down in Clay County. It's literally on the outskirts. It is a huge and mostly forested, swampy, dusty palmetto property. In fact, there was a soldier who, during training, got disoriented, and it took a half day to find him. They had hundreds of people searching. It is that large a property. There is certainly room to put one of these facilities, and it will be no more hospitable than what are they calling it down in the Everglades? Alligator, Alcatraz, whatever. It just there's no swamp. It's not a nice place. And on a day like today, a week like today, it's going to be hot. It's going to be dusty. I noticed that when they put the trailers up, the video we're seeing of the trailers being put up in the Everglades, that some appear to have AC units on top. But I can remember a certain Florida sheriff who used to house his inmates in tents and serve them bologna sandwiches 20 years ago, and it had to stop because the heat frustration was getting to them. So I expect it's going to be as bad as can be.
Yeah, it's interesting, Robin, because this was actually a former POW camp in World War II. Camp Landing was, and in some ways, it would be a little bit of a return to roots. But this is, just kind of an extension of what seems to have caught a lot of traction. I saw the Alligator Alcatraz and the reporting on Camp Landing as a possible detention site reported by, Newsweek and CNN and Fox News. So this is getting a lot of headlines. I'm curious how much of it you think is about generating the headlines and how much is just determined to service this administration's goals of greatly increasing the number of people who are detained and deported.
Well, you have to have a place to hold people that are in the process of being deported. I don't think that they're planning on housing criminal aliens there, so that would be a different category. But you've got 73,000 acres that comprise Camp Landing. That's an awful lot of room. So if you were to devote maybe 100 acres or so to short-term, I guess these would be short-term detention facilities, I don't see that there's a problem. I think some of the residents in and around that area are worried about escapees. I don't think that's going to be an issue. If there is somebody who winds up leaving or escaping, as long as they're not criminal aliens, I think it's probably a manageable problem.
Yeah, there were some interviews I think that were done this week by some TV stations talking to people who live around Camp Landing. And, we should say it has been, a rural area, but is a rapidly growing part of the state. Like a lot of places in Northeast Florida, Clay County has seen a ton of growth. But to your point, there are people who are arrested for basically civil offenses of, not having the proper documentation as
Which
opposed
is
to people.
distinct from criminal aliens.
Right.
Which criminal alien can either be somebody who committed a crime in this country or they committed a crime in their country of origin that would also be considered a crime in the U.S.
Okay, and so this could be a holding site. It could get expensive. Mike Mendenhall, they've said, this is something that would be a bill footed by FEMA, which that agency's days are numbered. But in the meantime, they're saying that this is not going to be a state expense, that this is something could cost as much as $450 million a year for these facilities, Alligator Alcatraz and this one, but that wouldn't be something that local taxpayers are shouldering.
Yeah, and I think the CNN article that you referenced, they said that that Florida would actually would put the cost up front and then be reimbursed by FEMA. But the other thing I thought was kind of interesting too that could add a logistical issue as well as likely more expense is. In a place like Florida where we have hurricane season and you have to evacuate, they have to have plans in place and alternate shelters to evacuate these detainees. And that was also pointed out by CNN's reporting. So I think that, I think there are going to be other, like anything else, there's going to be other costs that will be associated with it that may not be, just part of the bottom line of operating and maintenance.
Yeah, and there has been some negative reaction down in South Florida, including from some, indigenous, populations that say that this land shouldn't be used for that purpose, but also just a great increase of traffic. I mean, if you've watched any of the news surrounding the establishment of this Alligator Alcatraz facility, lots of trucks going in and out. I mean, there's a huge staging that has to happen to prepare this site for, hundreds, if not thousands of detainees. They're looking at putting 5,000 detention beds there really within the next week.
These are 2-lane roads down there. Alligator Alley and all those places are very rural, very out in the wilderness. Not unlike actually some parts. When you get to Camp Landing, yes, the roads do widen out and there's intersections, but you are on a 2-lane road in many cases with palmetto around you. And if you get a convoy of trucks, supply trucks, it does mess up traffic. And if you're in Clay County trying to get to Stark, you're going to end up finding a traffic and security issue there, because there'll certainly be some kind of security gate in what is now an open gate with a museum and some old planes displayed. It's going to be a different camp landing.
Yeah, well, we should say this is still very much a preliminary. There has not been any hard plan introduced. This was mentioned by the governor at a press conference that, in addition to this facility in the Everglades, that it will probably do the same thing up at Camp Landing. But I guess, that's still TBD, right? We're not at all certain that that's going to happen. Yeah. Well, we're going to move on. But if you'd like to join our conversation, you can do that at 904-549-2937. You can email firstcoastconnect@wjct.org. I want to shift now to talk about a big bill coming due for a man who sued over a public records request. Robin Lum, you can attest to this, but Curtis Lee is a well-known activist on the issue of public records. He has won many court battles over the use of fees, what he's deemed unreasonable fees or inaccessible public records. But this week, a judge ordered him to pay more than $130,000 to the state attorney's office to reimburse it for legal fees that they spent fighting his case. I'm going to bring in his attorney in just a minute. But Robin, you remember Curtis Lee pretty well from your time on council.
Yes, he was a constant presence. In fact, he was routinely being stonewalled by the Police and Fire Pension Fund whenever he'd do a public records request. He would ask for documents that you knew were readily available, and they would either drag their feet or they'd come up with this ridiculous cost for producing these documents. So he was winning those lawsuits. And as far as his skepticism of the public records process in the state of Florida, I'm very sympathetic, because I think it's essentially dysfunctional. You never know if you're getting the records you've asked, and there's all kinds of ways they can hide them from you. And a lot of the records are in the form of email exchanges using private email addresses or text messages. And so there's an awful lot of stuff that happens behind the scenes that you're never going to find out about that should be considered public records.
I mean, it's an interesting point, the way that sometimes they're disguised, because I think we all remember, email chains about important projects. One, I remember where they titled it Pancakes. It was about some, tree removal in the western part of the state. And that was the code word that they were using for that project. Locally, I think Scampy was something that was the JEA code word on emails, or Freebird, those were names.
There's also a feature where you can remove your text messages. You can basically, so I've gone back to look at text exchanges that I knew took place, and the only thing that's visible is what I said, not what was sent to me. So I share Mr. Lee's skepticism.
I want to bring in Jennifer Mansfield. She is a First Amendment attorney who is representing Curtis Lee in this case. Full disclosure, Jennifer was also the First Amendment lawyer who represented First Coast News Channel 12 when I worked there. But Jen, good morning. Thanks for joining the program.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
So the judge's order on June 18th basically said that no reasonable person would have brought this dispute to court, basically saying that Curtis Lee's insistence on suing over these records, which he said he had not been able to obtain, was frivolous, and therefore he should pay the expense that it cost the state attorney's office to defend the case. So can you tell us, why is it that your client believed that his request and his subsequent lawsuit was reasonable?
Well, as Robin said just a minute ago, Mr. Lee felt stonewalled by the state attorney's office, and the state attorney's office did treat Mr. Lee differently under the guise of being extra generous. They really monitored him and all of his requests. But most importantly, part of the part of the lawsuit that survived after 4 counts were filed, 1 count survived through hearing, and that count was not about asking for the records, but about a 3-month delay that happened before his public records request was acknowledged by the state attorney's office. And his then attorney, I did not represent him in the merits of the case, I only represented him for the sanctions portion. And his attorney at the time thought that he had a sincere, non-frivolous action, saying that all the attorney's time he took to negotiate and to get through the bureaucracy of the state attorney's office should be awarded has fees because the Public Records Act is supposed to help people get records, not hinder them. And the case was transferred to Volusia County because Mr. Lee is so well known. It was felt that he might not get an impartial judge here in Duval County, and so it was transferred to a judge in Volusia County, who really did not even mention that portion of the lawsuit in the order, but focused merely on the state attorney's argument that the lawsuit did not even ask for documents and therefore it was frivolous, which is just not the law. You can sue to enforce various parts of statutes. In the Public Records Act, there are a lot of different requirements, not just to hand over documents.
And so you noted that all of the judges basically in this circuit had to recuse themselves, which is why this was argued in Volusia County Court. But your client...
was a recusal done by the chief judge on behalf of all the judges.
I got you. So he ordered that.
Yeah.
So, but as we mentioned, your client has a history of, public records requests that have been consequential in some ways, including his, long battle with the Police and Fire Pension Fund, and also with the state attorney that preceded Melissa Nelson, Angela Corey. He had some long fights with her about being able to pay for public records, the method of payment that would be accepted there. And he had a number of victories. Can you just kind of remind us a little bit about his successes as opposed to this current case?
Well, as Robin mentioned, he sued the Police and Fire Pension Fund because of stonewalling, I think twice, and won both times. He was represented then by Robert Dees, who is now a judge here in Jacksonville. So well-respected counsel. He hasn't pursued cases on his own. He's always had legal counsel and relied on the advice of legal counsel. And despite that, this judge said has faulted Mr. Lee under this new provision in the public records law that allows an agency to go after someone for frivolous filing. Now, Florida already has a frivolous lawsuit statute, which specifically does not allow sanctions against an individual if they're represented by legal counsel, precisely because you're entitled to rely on the advice of your lawyer. But this judge refused to adopt that portion of the frivolous statute and sanctioned Mr. Lee personally, even though he was represented by legal counsel, which is an extremely dangerous precedent.
I'm curious if you can just kind of tell us, I mean, in addition to his successful lawsuits, Curtis Lee is known as a little bit, kind of like a burr in the saddle of public officials for his persistence, for his extensive public records requests. And I wonder if you can just kind of comment on, the role of a gadfly sort of in advancing the cause of public records, because, while he has had, he is, I think, infuriated, I think it's fair to say, a lot of people who've been asked for public records, he's also actually, affected some change in that time.
He has, and he really takes his role as a gadfly as a patriotic part of being a citizen and overseeing his government. And he's a retired gentleman, and basically these lawsuits, these public records requests, he pays for out of his retirement that he has stashed away as part of his activities as a citizen. And he is known through a lot of agencies because of his persistence. He will readily admit that people will find him annoying. But you know what? Being annoying is not against the law, and it doesn't mean you have a sanctionable lawsuit.
Yeah.
In that case, too, wasn't he trying to get information on an investigation the state's attorney's office was doing into a judge? That was the information he was seeking, wasn't it?
That was part of the information he was seeking, and we had a journalism professor be an expert witness in the case to explain that it's a journalistic technique to Mr. Lee had filed a complaint about that judge asking the state attorney to do an investigation. And he didn't know whether one had been opened. And so the follow-up that our journalism professor explained is to do a public records request asking for documents about the investigation, because that's how you find out whether an investigation exists. And that was part of the records request that went 3 months unresponded to. And agencies have two obligations. They have to respond quickly, saying, yes, we got your request, you're in line behind everyone else, and we'll get to it. And then when they get to it, they have to produce the document and then explain if they're holding back any documents.
Jennifer,
and he never got that initial acknowledgement.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I wanted to ask you, you represent a number of news outlets and have over the years. I recall a time when it was much more common to sort of have these challenges, whether they blossomed into, full-blown lawsuits, but to have a lawyer's involvement, crafting letters, responding to public agencies that had been recalcitrant. Have you seen an overall decline in kind of the media's appetite or, capabilities from a financial standpoint to bring those kinds of challenges?
Oh, definitely. The fall of traditional media is also the fall of bankrolls to support investigative reporting. And oftentimes investigative reporting will require an attorney to send a letter saying, hey, your response to this public records request is inadequate. And people, it costs money to hire attorneys and more money to hire good attorneys. You get what you pay for, even in the attorney land. And so yes, that has decreased. We also have an increase in judges who are siding with the government agencies more and more.
And this changed.
So Mr. Lee has filed 6 lawsuits. The first 4 he won. This now is the second one he's lost.
And you think that's a pattern or kind of a trend that you're seeing?
Yes.
Okay. I want to ask you, Mike, because and Dan both, as longtime journalists in this market, just kind of your thoughts about that as well. I certainly feel like there were many times when our responses to public records were insufficient for whatever reason, and it really was necessary to get the involvement of somebody who could sort of like cite statute and push back on reasons that we sort of intuited were not maybe the most compelling reasons to deny a public records request, but you really needed an attorney there by your side to kind of help.
Yeah, in 34 years at the Times Union, we had an attorney office that was on our side and worked with us, and there were multiple filings for requests. Back in the days when you'd actually have to go to the clerk's office up in the mezzanine of the courthouse and physically look for the file, and then, as you mentioned earlier, Ann, you'd have to go get a money order and go back because that's the only payment that they allowed. Mm-hmm. Even now, in the media portals that we have to use to find these results, if you're not precise to the case number, precise to the police report number, you get a no records found, and they're there because your source is holding the damn police report in their hand. Mm-hmm. So it is frustrating right now. I'm even being charged for something that I never knew I had to be charged for, and I've decided we're not going to pay for it because we don't need it now. It took them a month to respond to the agency, and it's beyond the point where it's necessary.
Yeah, and I'll just add to what Dan said. I mean, it really depends on what you're looking for too. The more like if sometimes you have to do a public records request for something relatively like innocuous, like a employment contract with a public official. Usually those come through pretty quickly, But the more sensitive the information you're looking for, the longer it typically takes, and you can feel the concern of the agency by how long it takes that public records request to come back. You were mentioning the JEA sale attempt scandal earlier, and I know Dan's colleagues at the Florida Times Union probably ran into this a lot more than I did because they were really digging in deep. But one of the things that I noticed is as I was covering that, public records became more available as the city council's attorneys' investigation moved forward, and they became more aggressive, as well as when the political tides against that sale started to turn, that's when things started to become a little more easily available. So it's just interesting, kind of, you can see the psychology of it as like just as the accessibility becomes either better or worse.
And one media portal recently went dark for over a week. There were no new reports posted on it. Was there no staff? Who knows?
I do want to say that, the state attorney put out a long statement after this judgment was announced, and, basically said that the judge concluded that the state attorney had fully and timely responded to the plaintiff, that they had complied with the overall spirit and purpose of the Public Records Act, and that Curtis Lee had brought his lawsuit, quote, for an improper purpose. I do think, Jennifer, too, they initially said that they had spent $180,000 or more preparing for and kind of, defending this case. And so the payment of $130,000 is less than they say it cost them and cost taxpayers.
Well, Mr. Lee has done has continued to submit public records requests to the state attorney's office and has documentation that they incurred more than $200,000 in attorney's fees. And a large portion of that was in the request to get sanctions against Mr. Lee, because during the lawsuit, Mr. Lee suffered a personal loss of his longtime partner, and he was in mourning and felt like he didn't want to pursue the lawsuit and offered what we call a walkaway settlement to the state attorney's office, which means both parties would part and cover their own fees and just walk away. And the state attorney's office refused. They said, no, we want our fees. And so Mr. Lee was essentially forced to continue litigating in order to try to avoid the sanctions. The other thing is that this statute was passed in 2017 in reaction to a series of lawsuits, some of which occurred in Jacksonville, but that occurred throughout Florida, when some, quote unquote, smart person decided that they could game the system by using the Public Records Act fee provision for requesters as a money-making scheme. And lawyers who helped those plaintiffs were sanctioned by the Florida Bar for fee splitting with those people. But the legislature reacted for the first time, imposing a attorney's fees provision that agencies could use in order to fight those frivolous lawsuits, which were really gotcha lawsuits. That the scheme would actually look up existing contracts on the Florida Department Financial website and confirm that there were contracts, even have copies of the contracts, and then go to private agencies, including nonprofits, to walk in the door and say, give me these documents, targeting the private agencies because they're not public servants who are more familiar with the Public Records Act, in order to trick them into not complying and then suing and then splitting fees with the client. During the legislative process, it was complained that this lawsuit would lead to results against others, and the legislature said, no, everyone knows it's only against these cases. And this judge said, no, the way the law is written doesn't limit it to just those cases, and sanctioned Mr. Lee anyway. So it's a lesson in writing legislation for our legislature as well.
Well, Jennifer Mansfield, First Amendment lawyer, thanks so much for joining us this morning. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
I want to move on now, Dan. I know you've got to duck out of here early today, but I do want to talk about the replacement for Fire Chief Keith Powers. He's going to be leaving the Jacksonville Fire and Rescue Department on the 30th after almost 30 years with JFRD and 6 years as their chief. So there are a few days left. There are now a few finalists left. You reported on that this week.
There's 5 finalists out of the 17 who were interviewed. The 5 apparently have been or will be interviewed by Mayor Deegan, and I am told the announcement will be coming probably Monday-ish from the mayor herself, and then the city council must approve. Those finalists are Fire Prevention Deputy Division Chief Damian Bell, Fire Division Chief Jake Blanton, Emergency Prep Deputy Division Chief Percy Golden, also known as the religious guy. He says the prayers during many of the events that they do. Battalion Chief Darren Hooten and Deputy Director Willie King.
All right. So there's 5 left. And this is an announcement that is made by the mayor. Robin Lum, in your time in city government, it has on occasion been very controversial, the choice of fire chief. Um, and and yet it is the mayor's decision. How much of this do you expect is going to just be something that she has come to an agreement on with the existing leadership over there, and how much of it is just going to be straight up to her?
Um, I have an issue with appointing a permanent replacement at this time. I think the wisest course of action would be an interim director. Actually, they're called directors of the Jacksonville Fire and Rescue Division Department. And that's because, I don't know if you read it, but there was a very scathing article that appeared in Folio about a month ago, written by Battalion Chief Chip Drysdale, that was highly critical of how JFRD handled the fire on the Hogue Shaman. That was the fire in 2020 on what they call a railroad ship, roll on, roll off. That had about 1,000 junk cars headed for Africa.
And that was at Blunt Island and here in Jacksonville, that
Yeah,
fire.
it was here in Jacksonville, and and he was originally the incident commander, and he had ordered the firefighters off the ship.
He
and then
being
they,
the chief?
meaning Chief Drysdale.
Oh, Chief Drysdale. Okay.
Yeah, and so when the command staff arrived, they ordered the firefighters back on, and they vented the ship. So you had a fire that was not contained, but at least it wasn't being fed by outside oxygen. So when they vented the ship, you had a couple of explosions, and a number of firefighters were seriously injured. It was a miracle, according to Drysdale, that no one was killed. And so in this article in Folio, he was highly critical of the training that has been taking place, that the lack of shipboard fire training for train derailments, other non-traditional forms of firefighting that you might encounter in an urban area. And so if I were the mayor, I would try to get to the bottom of that. Are there really serious training deficiencies within the JFRD? And try to figure out how you want to address those. And making a permanent replacement at this time, that's not what I would do. I would do an interim replacement of using a person who's not in that pool of candidates.
Interesting. And I mean, that recently, within the last, I don't know, year or so, resulted in a big settlement for the injured firefighters because there were a number of them that were.
And the settlement would have been 10 times that high, but for the negligence of JFRD. It was basically the way it played out. So in other words, because the JFRD acted in a manner that was negligent, that put a lot of the burden on the city of Jacksonville itself, whereas otherwise the entire cost of the injuries would have been borne by the owner of the ship.
Mike Mendenhall, have you heard much discussion from the folks at City Hall about this decision? I mean, obviously, the fire chief is a big figure in public life. This particular fire chief, in addition to the Ho incident, oversaw COVID, oversaw probably the largest expansion of fire stations in city history in terms of, the footprint. There's been a big push to keep fire-related insurance rates at, optimal levels and kind of respond to the city's growth by, building these additional facilities. And so he's seen and done a lot in his 6 years.
He has, and he was also a holdover from the Curry administration too. He was one of the few people that was in top leadership that remained during the transition into the Deegan administration. As far as here, what I've heard at City Hall, I mean, I think there's a lot of kind of like wait and see as to who the mayor ends up nominating or picking. But and not to put Robin on the spot, but I do have an additional question for you. As part of your assessment, have to do with the fact that all of the top 5 candidates are currently in the JFRD system. They're all currently in leadership roles.
I think that's potentially problematic. Do you bring somebody in from outside of Jacksonville? I'm not sure they'd be well received. So I think the problem is. I think you want to know if these criticisms that came from Chief Drysdale are legitimate, and you want to identify the issues you want to correct, and then you go about hiring somebody, putting somebody in that position you can rely on to make those fixes.
Do you anticipate, though, I mean, just briefly, Mike, the mayor has had some earlier choice rejections of people that she wanted in positions, Randy DeFore, Elizabeth Anderson, Al Ferraro. You think that it's possible that her pick could be, it has to be approved by council?
It does. I think it depends on who it is. I mean, the folks you mentioned, they were viewed by many members of the council as more of a political pick. They were either aligned with Mayor Deegan or they had endorsed Mayor Deegan. So I mean, I think a lot of it's going to depend on who this individual is. If they're more of a straight line, JFRD employee.
Yeah, well, we'll have to watch, and I know you'll be reporting on it. Robin Lum,
By the way,
Mike Mendenhall. I'm going to leave it there. I'm
Sorry.
sorry. Thanks so much for being here. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Up next, how you can get a golden ticket to a local production of a Roald Dahl classic.
Terrell Hogan Law.
I'm Wayne Hogan. Highway, hospital, home, work. Where injuries happen can make a difference in the law and the outcome.
More at terrellhoganlaw.com.
Although well-intentioned, elderspeak may actually be harmful. I'm Dr. Joe Servin. Join me tomorrow at 4 for What's Health Got to Do with It, only on WJCT News, 89.9 Jacksonville.
On the next Florida Roundup, beachgoers and property owners have been feuding for years over who owns the beach. Governor DeSantis just signed a new law that's meant to protect public access and make it easier to restore eroded beaches. If you're hitting the beach this summer, is enough being done to protect access to your favorite beach? If you're a beachfront property owner, do you worry about trespassers? Email your questions and comments to radio@thefloridaroundup.org and join me, Matthew Petty, Friday from noon to 1.
On the next Fresh Air, we remember war correspondent Rod Nordland. He was diagnosed with a lethal brain tumor in 2019 and died on Sunday at the age of 75. He talked about facing mortality as a war correspondent and as a patient. And we'll hear from legendary guitarist Buddy Guy, who has a cameo in Ryan Coogler's film Sinners. Join us.
Today at 1 on WJCT News 89.9. Obliteration or just a slight setback? What damage did the U.S. really do to Iran's nuclear program? A look at the fallout so far of President Trump's strikes. Plus, an energetic Democratic socialist takes the New York City mayoral primary with a down-on-its-luck Democratic Party can learn from the win. It's the Friday News Roundup next time on 1A. Today, starting at 10 on WJCT News 89.9.
Welcome back. Well, from the river of chocolate to the secret of the everlasting gobstopper, the story of Willy Wonka's candy empire has succeeded as a book, Broadway show, and multiple movies. Here to tell us about the Alhambra's staging of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory is director Shane Stroff. Good to see you, Shane.
Hello. Thanks for having us.
Thank you for being here. We're also joined by Jonathan Van Dyke. He plays Willy Wonka. Good morning, Jonathan.
Good morning.
And Jake Ayers. He's the actor playing Charlie Bucket, the iconic Charlie of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. So I was saying, Jake, I mean, what a fun role. Is this a show that you were familiar with before you were cast as Charlie?
Yeah, so I grew up watching all the different versions. I watched the Johnny Depp version. I watched the Gene Wilder version. So I watched all of them. So when this show came up, I was pretty familiar with the show. So
and you have a certain look about you that kind of reminds me of the Charlie from the Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, the Gene Wilder version. Is that something that you helped you, do you think, in getting this role, or is it something that people were just appealed by, your kind of skill and your charm?
Maybe.
Don't know.
He was perfect for the role. I mean, I knew this when I worked with him last Christmas.
What did you work on then?
We worked on A Christmas Story together.
Okay.
And I thought that's Charlie Bucket right there.
Yeah.
So He's been a perfect fit.
You have done so many big ensemble shows in the past, and I'm curious about, this is a huge cast. I mean,
It
this is a
is,
really
yes.
big production. So how does it compare to some of the ones that you've done in the past?
This one is a really, really technical show. It's a big cast. We have a lot of tech elements in the show that we needed to work out in the tech process, which is about 3 days. We have an elevator that's hydraulically lifted. We have projections. We have so many light cues in this show. It's very, very technical. We also transform the entire interior of the theater into the Wonka factory for the second act. So the second act, the whole audience is a part of the factory.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
I was curious. I mean, this is a dinner theater. Is there some like candy element that satisfies the people that are coming? Because I'm sure like when you're sitting there and you're watching all of the candy being made and all of the Oompa Loompas running around, which we're showing some really fun pictures for people who are watching our live stream, stills of this production that are just terrific. But do people get to eat candy at the show too?
Well, absolutely. We have a great dessert menu. We've got some little options because for this show. And yeah, you're definitely going to want to have your chocolate and your candy on the side.
Absolutely.
For sure. Yes.
So, Jonathan, you play Willy Wonka, which has got to be just one of the funnest roles to inhabit. Do you find yourself drawn to kind of one of the earlier, better known portrayals, or are you just trying to make it your own?
Well, as a kid of the 70s, I had the books were in the library, and also the movie had a huge impact on me. So, first I think you become endeared to Charlie Bucket, such an honorable young man, and then now that I'm an old timer, Willy Wonka is such a magnificent character to sink your teeth into. He's unpredictable. He's mysterious. He's funny. He's wacky. So it is. It's a wonderful role to be able to throw myself into.
And more music in it than I think of. I mean, for some reason, when I think back to the original movie, I don't really think of it like as a musical. It seems so well integrated. Do you have, though, a particular favorite part of the performance, Jake?
Yeah, I like the finale song "View from Here." It's just so fun. It's such a heartwarming song because it's the song that when Charlie figures out what the grand prize is, and Willy Wonka just really just sings it, and then they blend in perfectly together, and I think it's just a beautiful song, and it's well written, and I enjoy singing it.
And you are going to be a rising freshman at Douglas Anderson in the fall. Are you able to incorporate doing like work at the Alhambra as well? I mean, something like A Christmas Story or this. How does that work in your schedule?
Well, over the summer, it's been easier, but over last Christmas, I had to work with the principal at my school, and we had to figure out certain days, and that I was off for like 2 periods at the first thing in the morning, but like we had to work with them.
I'm
Yeah.
curious, Shane, you've done, as we said, so many productions in Florida. You've done Hairspray, you've done Spam-A-Lot, Mamma Mia, Footloose, and you're a choreographer, and so a big part of your role is kind of creating these memorable and large ensemble numbers. How does this compare to those productions?
It's definitely a big production. I work with my choreographer Eric Sereda is my partner in this one. So he choreographed all of the show, and then I directed it. So we worked together to kind of create this together. We, as a team, we work really, really great together. He knows how to complete my vision, and we just kind of work together and get all the cast all ready to go really quickly.
I'm sure it is going to be a ton of fun. It opened last night.
We open officially tonight. We
Okay.
had 2 previews yesterday, but officially we open tonight, and then we close on August 17th.
Excellent. Well, folks can get tickets at alhambrajax.com or at the box office. Thanks so much for coming on today. Break a leg.
Thank you. It's going to be fun.
Thank you.
All right. And thank you for listening. If you have comments or questions, you can send them to First Coast Connect at WJCT.org. Join us Monday when Jackson.
Support for First Coast Connect is provided by Baptist Health and the North Florida TPO.
Baptist Health is a proud supporter of First Coast Connect. Baptist Health, committed to building a healthier community for all of us. More info at 202-4YOU or baptistjax.com. The North Florida TPO is dedicated to transportation planning, funding, clean fuels, and new technologies for a vibrant, resilient, and connected region. More information available at northfloridatpo.com.
Hip hop and soul music, funk and jazz from the locals and the grassroots artists. It's the Neighborhood Show with me, Mr. Alpete. Come take a walk with me through the neighborhood on Saturdays at 8 p.m. on WJCT News 89.9.